the battle over tariffs with the U.S. could soon show up on your grocery bill in the form of higher food prices.
Sunbright Foods near Leamington, Ontario is the Canadian-owned and operated producer of brands like Unico and Primo.
At a moment when global supply chains are under strain and food prices are climbing across developed economies, Canada has made a decisive move that few expected. In Ottawa, the federal government unveiled a sweeping plan aimed at insulating the country's food system from external shocks, trade pressure, and political coercion. The announcement was not framed as emergency relief or short-term damage control. It was presented as a structural reset, one designed to ensure that Canadians can feed themselves regardless of turbulence at the U.S. border. This shift comes as trade tensions with the United States intensify. Tariff threats from Washington have injected uncertainty into industries that once relied on seamless cross-border integration. Food, long treated as a shared North American system, has suddenly become a point of strategic vulnerability. Canada's response is not to negotiate from weakness, but to invest its way out of dependence. Before we go deeper into how this plan works and why it matters, if you value clear, in-depth analysis of the forces shaping global economics and politics, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep this kind of reporting going and keeps you informed as these stories continue to unfold. For decades, Canada and the United States operated as a single, tightly interwoven food network. Livestock crossed borders multiple times before reaching grocery shelves. Produce grown in California filled Canadian stores through the winter months. Processing facilities were optimized for efficiency, not resilience, assuming that open trade would always be the default. That assumption no longer holds. Tariffs imposed by the Trump administration shattered the logic of that system. Duties on steel and aluminum rippled through agricultural infrastructure. Threats of broader tariffs, some as high as 100%, introduced risk into every cross-border transaction. Suddenly, food security was no longer just an economic issue. It became a national one. Canadian farmers felt the shock almost immediately. Beef prices dropped sharply as export access narrowed. Pork shipments slowed. Canola exports faced new uncertainty. At the same time, Canadian consumers were hit from the opposite direction, with grocery prices climbing well above headline inflation. The very structure that once kept food cheap and abundant was now amplifying instability. Rather than attempting to patch the old system, the Carney government chose a different path. The centerpiece of the response is a $500 million investment dedicated to strengthening domestic food supply chains. This funding is not designed as a subsidy to offset losses. It is meant to rebuild capacity, processing, storage, distribution inside Canada. The goal is straightforward: eliminate the bottlenecks that force Canadian food to leave the country for processing and return at a higher cost. Meat production is a prime example. Canada raises vast numbers of cattle and hogs, yet a significant portion has historically been sent to U.S. facilities for slaughter and processing. Tariffs turned that arrangement from inefficient to unsustainable. New funding will support the construction and expansion of Canadian processing plants, keeping value and jobs at home. Alongside this, a separate food security fund is targeting small and medium-sized producers. This portion focuses heavily on greenhouse expansion and local food production. Canada's climate has always made year-round vegetable production challenging, but modern greenhouse technology has changed the equation. Controlled environments, LED lighting, and advanced hydroponics now allow continuous output even through harsh winters. To accelerate this shift, the government introduced an immediate expensing provision for greenhouse investments. Any greenhouse brought online before 2030 can be written off entirely in the year it becomes operational. This creates a powerful incentive for rapid construction and expansion. The effect is already being felt in provinces like Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec, where greenhouse output has been rising steadily for years. Within a decade, Canada could reach near self-sufficiency in key vegetable categories: tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, leafy greens, dramatically reducing imports from the United States. That change would not be temporary. Once built, greenhouse infrastructure becomes a permanent asset, immune to tariff swings and political pressure. The plan also includes targeted support for food banks and community distribution networks. While modest in dollar terms compared to the headline figure, this component serves a dual purpose.
To ship all these tomatoes to market, they require a lot of cans that are manufactured in the U.S.
We buy the equivalent of about 200 million cans annually.
It addresses immediate food insecurity while anchoring demand for Canadian-produced goods at the local level. Strengthening these networks reinforces domestic supply chains from the ground up. What makes this strategy significant is its permanence. Trade disputes come and go. Tariffs can be raised or lowered with a signature. Infrastructure, once built, reshapes economic behavior for generations. Processing plants do not disappear when relations improve. Greenhouses do not shut down because tariffs are lifted. Each investment reduces reliance on external systems that Canada does not control. This is where Washington's strategy misfired. Tariffs were intended to create leverage, economic pain that would force concessions. Instead, they provided political cover for a transformation that Canada had long postponed. Food sovereignty, once an abstract policy goal, became a practical necessity. The broader context matters. This food initiative is not isolated. It fits into a larger strategy aimed at reducing dependence on the United States across multiple sectors. Procurement policies are redirecting billions toward domestic suppliers. Infrastructure investments are opening new trade routes to Europe and Asia. New trade relationships are diversifying export markets beyond North America. Each move reduces the effectiveness of tariffs as a coercive tool. Food is especially sensitive. Governments can tolerate pressure in many industries, but threats to basic necessities demand decisive action. By acting now, Canada is locking in resilience before the next shock arrives. The political framing has also been deliberate. By announcing the plan in a grocery setting and emphasizing consumer prices, the government aligned economic restructuring with household concerns. Rising food costs are one of the most visible pressures facing voters. Positioning infrastructure investment as protection against higher grocery bills makes the policy broadly popular and difficult to oppose. It also changes the domestic debate. Critics, who might otherwise resist government intervention, are placed in a bind. Opposing measures framed as defending Canadians from foreign pressure carries political risk. At the same time, the economic benefits, jobs, rural development, reduced volatility, extend far beyond the immediate crisis. The implications for American agricultural exporters are profound. Canada is a major destination for U.S. produce and processed foods. Much of that trade exists because Canada historically lacked sufficient domestic capacity. As that gap closes, market access shrinks, not because of tariffs, but because demand is being met internally. Greenhouse expansion alone threatens billions in annual exports from warm climate U.S. producers. Expanded meat processing could shift entire supply chains northward. These losses would not be recoverable simply by changing policy in Washington. Once Canadian producers capture domestic market share, they are unlikely to relinquish it. Timing is critical. The tax incentives tied to 2030 create urgency. Companies that act now stand to gain the most. Expect a surge in construction, equipment purchases, and hiring over the next few years. By the end of the decade, Canada's food landscape could look fundamentally different, more localized, more resilient, and far less exposed to external shocks. Even a full reversal of U.S. tariff policy would not halt this momentum. The economic logic has shifted. Domestic production reduces transport costs, stabilizes prices, and insulates businesses from geopolitical risk. Once these advantages are realized, they become self-reinforcing. The $500 million allocation is best understood as a catalyst, not a ceiling. It unlocks private investment, accelerates projects already under consideration, and signals long-term commitment. Governments rarely get opportunities to restructure core systems with broad public support. Trade pressure created that opening. What began as a threat has become leverage of a different kind. Pressure applied from the outside has driven internal strengthening. Each dollar invested now reduces vulnerability later. Each facility built weakens the effectiveness of future coercion. In the end, this is not just about food. It is about autonomy, resilience, and control over essential systems. The lesson extends beyond Canada. In a world where economic tools are increasingly weaponized, dependence is risk, capacity is security. Canada's response turns that principle into policy, and the effects will be felt long after the current trade tensions fade from headlines. If you found this breakdown useful and want to stay ahead of stories shaping the global economic landscape, make sure to like this video and subscribe. More analysis is coming, and this story is far from over.